Well, this topic may give you more or less heartburn depending on whether you're religious or not, but if you're not religious, I would still urge you to listen to this because I think everybody needs to know this argument that neoliberalism affects a lot of different aspects of our lives. And this talk is going to be about the American scene because that's what I know best. However, it would be interesting to hear what you guys have to say, especially if you come from other countries, whether you see a similar phenomenon where you are. Here we have a picture of Pastor Paula White with Donald Trump. She is chair of the Evangelical Advisory Board to the President, and she is a preacher of the prosperity gospel, which we'll get to a little bit in a minute. But first, I want to go back in history a bit. In the 19th century, we have Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, talking about how American Christianity had adjusted itself to the political and economic priorities of the country. I use the term recuperation. Some of you may be familiar with that, but the idea is that whatever it is adjusts itself and gets reabsorbed back into the larger system. And that is what Tocqueville described happening to American Christianity. Here's a couple of quotes from Tocqueville. He says, "If it serves man very much as an individual that his religion be true, this is not so for society. Society has nothing to fear nor to hope from the other life. And what is most important to it is not so much that all citizens profess the true religion, but they profess a religion." What Tocqueville was describing there is the general American attitude that religious people were to be encouraged and people without religion were to be discouraged, because we thought that religious people would naturally bring order and stability to society, and that's what was needed for this still young country to grow and become prosperous. He also says, "Among the Anglo-Americans, some profess Christian dogmas because they believe them, others because they are afraid of not looking like they believe them. Christianity therefore reigns without obstacles." Again, this is a quote that plays up the social, political, economic utility of religion. And this is what Tocqueville thought all Americans agreed upon while he visited there. It was difficult for an American, he said, to deviate or to not conform from the general Christian, what he would have recognized as civil religion, because it had been so thoroughly absorbed in Americanism as a whole that it was equated with law and order, stability, prosperity, patriotism, and all of these other things. These are statements that are generalizable across the American Christian spectrum, left, middle, right. So I would say that we see a generalized prosperity gospel, and it's associated with a particular kind of evangelicalism that plays up the idea that to be wealthy is a sign of God's blessing and a sign that you're doing things right. And that's one version of this. But what I'm trying to say is that American Christianity in general claims that wealth is not a problem as long as you give. And giving might mean tithing, but it might mean less than that, or it might mean giving to the church, or it might mean giving to some other organizations. But as long as one is generous back, then one does not need to worry. So that's a part of the neoliberal Christian faith. There's a mingling of faith and patriotism, and that again is generalizable. It's more intense in the right-wing evangelical side of the equation, but it's by no means absent in most mainstream and even left-leaning mainstream denominations. This idea that to be a good Christian and a good American patriot at the same time go together. In almost all churches, you'll find the American flag at the front. There's an identification of democracy with the will of God. Now, democracy means different things to different people, but there's this general notion in America that democracy is good and that it is more or less the optimal form of government because it involves freedom, particularly freedom to worship and so on and so forth. And so therefore, obviously, it is also associated with the will of God. Then there's an acceptance of the state's priorities. economic growth being very important, internal order, national security, and even international dominance, since the idea there is that America generally has a good model for other states to follow, and therefore is generally good influence on the world. Or the idea, sort of the flip side of that, is that if America wasn't involved in the world as much, the world would be a worse place. Going along with these political and economic aspects of neoliberal Christianity is the idea of individualized salvation. This is the idea accepted by an awful lot of Christians that the main point of the Christian faith is that Jesus Christ died for our sins in order to substitute and pay the penalty that we would otherwise have to pay to God, which would be damnation. And by doing this, he wipes our slate clean, and then we can get into heaven. Now, that I call that individualizing salvation, because each one of us, from this perspective, is seen as, if they accept Jesus' role and Jesus' sacrifice, then they receive this individualized salvation. And then the only thing needful is for them to believe and accept, and at the individual level. And going along with this is a tendency towards creedalism. What I mean by that is, the church confesses a creed, and I believe, and lists off a set of things that people have to believe if they want to be a Christian. And those are the things necessary for salvation, or believing in those items is what individually causes you to be accepted by God through Christ's sacrifice. Why is this important? Why is the penal substitution model important? Why is creedalism important? Because to a large extent it individualizes and privatizes the faith so that the person can be a saved Christian and not really have to have an opinion about or do anything about other larger social, economic, and political issues that might come up. Those can be handled by government, and of course we've already talked about how there's really a faith in government, in the American government, to handle those things. Now you may be asking yourself, what's wrong with some of this? And I'm not even going to try to argue that there is anything wrong with it. I think an awful lot of us, including myself, struggle with these things. However, if we really take a look at what Jesus says as written up in the New Testament, we do not find that prosperity is a very big deal. Well, we can mince words here, but he spent a lot of time paying attention to poor people, and not with the intention of making them rich. And also patriotism. Jesus doesn't say anything about the need to love God and country. He also doesn't say anything about democracy, economic growth, internal order, national security, or international dominance. In fact, the things that he does say, he does say things that might touch on those things, almost always in the negative. He's not keen on the idea that economic growth, or what we would identify as economic growth, makes people better people. If he was into internal order, he probably would have avoided doing the things that he did, which definitely stirred up an awful lot of trouble and got a lot of people killed. As I understand it, 2 different kings, Herod, killed an awful lot of people in an attempt to quell the political problems that might arise because Jesus came into the world. And the idea of individualizing salvation probably would seem strange to him, because he spent a lot of his time talking about how people were supposed to live, how they were supposed to go out and do things for their fellow man. So while many of these things may be good, I might even say we need to believe in them or support them because they benefit us, and that might be very true. The hard truth also is that it doesn't seem like the message coming from Jesus in the Bible really supports those things. And that is a tension that I feel comfortable sitting in, but a lot of people don't. And so I think there's a tendency for the priorities and the values of the society in which you live being equated with your religion's priorities and values. And that, I think, is neoliberal Christianity. And it does become more intense in neoliberal evangelicalism. I've been reading a book entitled Postcards from Babylon, The Church in American Exile by Brian Zahn, which I would recommend if you're a Christian, or even if you're not, and you just want to learn, I guess, kind of the underbelly of American Christianity and the problems with it. But this quote really struck me and has stayed with me all through today as I contemplate this. He says, "Consider this question. Should a follower of Jesus support torture under any circumstance?" You know the answer to that too, but when a 2014 Washington Post ABC News poll revealed that a majority of white evangelicals in America support the use of torture within or by the CIA, you know there is a great falseness prevailing within that particular religious subculture. Evangelical support of torture is an eruption of the real. I think what Brian means at the end of that is that this is a case where, in other words, when you see the evangelical support for torture, you can't help but realize for at least a split second that they are worshiping more the state than they are their God. All right, so all that social, political, and economic stuff is part of neoliberal religion. But there is another part. Some of you may remember me covering Wendy Brown's book, Undoing the Demos. I only spent one video on that. I probably should have done more. But one of the things that she pointed out is that these institutions that we've created that had nothing to do with the market, that were about other spheres of our life, that aren't about the market, have become about the market, have been absorbed into market thinking. And this is definitely the case with the American Christian church. And I'll just talk about a couple of examples, but I'm sure if you pay attention at all to what churches do, it won't be long before you realize that many of them purchase marketing plans. Some of them purchase entire programs. So, all their visuals, all their advertisements for, come to church, all their bulletins, the slides that they portray at the front of the church, they all come from a particular package. But many others just purchase marketing plans that are designed to try to bring more people to their particular church because they see themselves in competition with all the other churches around, and they want to distinguish themselves. And so it has the feel of Madison Avenue. If that churches will hire consultants and spend thousands and thousands of dollars on these consultant firms to help them come up with a plan for fundraising, and usually this is for some building project, right? And so the first phase is we hire consultants and they come in and they tell us how to do a fundraising campaign, and they sell us the fundraising campaign, and then we use that and then we conduct the campaign, and we measure the results along the way towards our goal of building this new building, etc. And the approach is, again, very much of a marketing bent in an area, religion, where it seems like it should be kind of out of place, or rather than perhaps hiring a consulting team, you might actually just have a conversation of people in the church. Inside the church, we find that success is measured in metrics, such as church attendance, rates of donation increase, survey responses, and the like. People, when they are surveyed or asked about what they want from their church are treated like and often even referenced as constituents. And they are often segmented into groups because this is a great marketing idea, right? Just as Facebook, targets you because you happen to be a male between the ages of 25 and 35, or you're an African American, and in a particular region of the country, you'll like certain products and certain ideas, and you'll want to see certain types of news, so they send more of that your way. Churches break people up into age groups, into gender groups, into married and single, into people with children and people who don't have children. And in this way, they believe that they can serve them better because they're giving them what they want. But again, this is a sort of marketing mentality. Let's find out what people want, organize them accordingly, and provide it to them, and then hopefully they will stick around and donate. And yes, this is the cynical side of American religion. Okay, so I realize that this is not the only side, and there are a lot of good things going on in any area. There's a lot of good things going on. So that is a caveat. We're focusing in on the other side of the equation. Okay, here's my first example. This is taken from a real life church. I've omitted the name and identifiers. Now, first of all, there's this notion that by building a better church, they will be able to serve people better. They will get more people to come to the church. Oftentimes this involves building a gymnasium, something where they can hold wedding ceremonies where youth can come and do activities. And they think that this will bring young people into the church, and it probably does, although every church does it, so it kind of there's a point of diminishing returns. Anyway, this is a quote from a promotional flyer from a church that's engaged or wants to engage in a building project and hired a consultant to come up with a fundraising campaign, and then has gone to the next phase and is communicating with the people, which it calls constituents, who might be interested in the campaign and support it. It says, the campaign goals and a detailed breakdown of the associated costs will be finalized during the preparation phase of the campaign. Church X will be recruiting the campaign leadership team over the next several weeks. Please consider volunteering if asked. After initial preparation and a silent phase, the campaign will be launched to the general public in the spring and summer. Constituents will be kept informed of the progress of the campaign via mailings, emails, newsletters, bulletin announcements, social media, and our website. Please pray for the success of the campaign. Well, except for that last sentence, it might be hard for you to know that you were dealing with a church pronouncement there. And that's the point. The church feels as though in order to get this done, it has to completely conform, it would seem, to the model of contemporary marketing and management techniques. And my final example, this comes from another church. It's a real-life example from a mainstream Protestant church. It's about marketing, and it's from an article on the church's website having to do with marketing your church so that you can get people to attend. And it says, when you imagine a corporate marketing plan, it's easy to think of advertising campaigns with print ads, broadcast commercials, and glitzy websites. A hefty price tag goes with that, and most local churches have neither the budget nor the interest in paying that sum. Yet small churches with limited resources can think like a marketing firm and achieve their goals for local visibility. The same process used by ad agencies seeking to win new accounts can be thought of as a two-phase approach, research and strategy. Now, again, I'm not saying that these things aren't sometimes necessary. People have to build churches if they want to have a church. Sometimes they got to build one bigger if they want to have more people. They do have to appeal to people and let them know why their place should, they should attend their place and not some other place and so on. But again, I think I'm on fairly solid ground in saying that Jesus, I've read New Testament. Okay, I'm not a biblical scholar by any stretch, but I don't remember hearing about marketing campaigns, church attendance, rates of donations, building of buildings. I guess it's safe to say that what's left out is just as important as what is left in when it comes to these things. And what's left out might have to do with things that don't conform so easily to the neoliberal world. I guess I'm going to leave that for you to figure out. But anyway, there's your example of neoliberalism and religion, and I hope this has satisfied the curious